So, today I want to talk about COVID billionaires. During the past year of the pandemic, most Americans have been hit really hard. In fact, I'd argue that most people across the world have been hit really hard by this pandemic. That said, I think it's safe to say that in a country like the United States, where over 20 million people are afraid they might lose their homes over the course of the next year, where food insecurity has been on the rise, and where people are choosing on a daily basis between food, rent, and medicine, that people are really struggling. Meanwhile, the United States government has struggled to pass stimulus. Republicans and corporate Democrats alike have backed off on providing substantial relief for most Americans, yet billionaires have made fortunes off of this pandemic, especially in the medical industry. And before we focus exclusively on the medical industry, just examining US billionaires, it's worth noting that US billionaires have made over $1.3 trillion since mid March of 2020, an increase of over 44%. The country's 664 billionaires have a combined wealth now of $4.3 trillion, from $3 trillion at the beginning of the pandemic, around March 18th of 2020. And that is something that is absolutely atrocious. Billionaires just in the United States made a fortune off of this pandemic. But when we examine the medical industry itself, we see that when Forbes released its 35th annual World Billionaire ranking, that 40 of the newcomers to this list made their wealth fighting COVID-19. And it's across the world, it's not just in the United States. In fact, 7 of the top 10 richest healthcare billionaires are based in China. And that's worth noting because it's not just a US issue. It is a global issue. It is happening across the world. And when we examine this in further detail, with the collapse of the economy that happened and the recession that started in March of 2020, when this pandemic really started, 1 year later, we find that things are looking much different for the billionaire class. 493 new billionaires joined the list over the course of the pandemic, propelled by the stock market going up and unprecedented economic stimulus. Among the newcomers to the list, over 40 new entrants drew their wealth from fighting COVID-19. One of them was the Moderna CEO, Stéphane Bancel. The others, on the other hand, got rich from selling protective equipment like PPE, diagnostic tests, antibody treatments, and software that helps authorities schedule vaccination campaigns. So basically, people made a fortune off of this pandemic. And while these specific names are not important, it's worth noting that, any billionaire might have replaced any of these people had they been in the same circumstances with the same luck and the same situation. So the names really aren't worth it. They aren't important. It's not, I think, worth its time to go after these specific names. But as we talk about this, the kind of system of capitalism that perpetuates and creates the type of wealth that any of these names might have been able to, make and inherit and grow with is worth talking about. And we also should note that Moderna's CEO and all of these other billionaires that have made their profit off of this pandemic have done so because they have been fortunate enough to be in the exact moment in time where their luck came at the cost of everyone else's misfortune. In a pandemic where over 31 million people in the US have gotten sick, where over 550,000 people have died, Moderna's stock prices, for example, have skyrocketed. If we look at the trend over the course of the past few years, as of December 7, 2018, the stock was hovering at about $18 to $19. And it hovers in that range all the way through until the beginning of the pandemic, where the stock prices start to skyrocket. And if we look at the current prices, they are in the range of $140 to $141, and they peaked at over $180. And while Pfizer hasn't had the same luck, their partner company from Germany, BioNTech, has basically risen in quite the same way. Most of the funding went into BioNTech and not Pfizer directly. So it's unsurprising to see that it rose from approximately $15 during October of 2019 all the way into the $120+ range. This is what we're talking about when we talk about wealth inequality. This is what is happening during this type of pandemic. And investors in these companies have literally made a fortune off of what has amounted to a global disaster. And the fact that most of this growth in these companies has also come from governments injecting money into these organizations makes it that much worse. The German government in particular has injected millions upon millions of dollars into specifically bio and tech, but just the whole research for the pandemic into these companies. And this research money has made stock prices go up. And while the US did not actually provide research money, what they did was provide a huge surplus of cash through a pre-order of a vast supply of these vaccines, which guaranteed sales and assisted Moderna and biotech in their stocks rising. Basically, by having all of this money injected and invested into the company, by having faith in these companies that they will be able to produce a vaccine, these governments have essentially made people billionaires. Meanwhile, they can't actually take care of their own citizens. And it begs the question, it really begs the question, why it is that these governments have not sought alternatives or didn't seek alternatives that would have brought about better national and international results than investing their money in a company who now owns the intellectual property on things that have been publicly funded. It would have made far more sense for these vaccines to be done through publicly funded institutions for publicly funded, situations. It would have made far more sense for the vaccines to be made available to all countries and to create a global effort at this, like they do with the flu vaccine. Before anyone says that this is not possible, the flu vaccine is handled this way every year. The World Health Organization distributes the information to everybody, and everyone has a chance to talk about which strains might be most prevalent and how we can deal with it globally. But instead, distribution and sales have been funneled into the hands of a few companies, and we've made billionaires off of this. The distribution sites should have been global. The vaccination effort should have been global, and we should have been making that kind of effort. And before anyone else comes out and tries to say, well, there wouldn't have been any sort of incentive or, to do this without any sort of profit model. That speaks to the greed and problems of a capitalist system that would actually make money and make profit off of a global pandemic where lives are at stake. We have to look at the fact that a country like Cuba, who has not been doing this for profit, has up to 5 vaccines in the works. And they will likely make those vaccines available to the entire world within the limitations of what a US embargo would allow them to do. And to make that even more of a thing to talk about, the vaccine distribution and what they're doing within their country has happened with all of the limitations of that very same embargo. They have not had the wealth and resources that a lot of other places have had. And again, they have 5 vaccines in the works. Can you imagine what would have happened in a world where the US, the EU, Cuba, and everyone else were working together to try to get the entire world vaccinated as quickly as possible? That maybe, just maybe, some of the variants that have formed may not have formed, that we might be not talking about an issue where a variant might happen that might subvert some of these vaccines that are being developed. And the thing is, we need to examine the fact that in Cuba, despite all of its limitations, 2 of their vaccines are in phase 3 trials already. They have done substantial work. And within their own limitations, they will probably try to provide this vaccine for as many people as possible. In the meantime, across the world, billionaires have literally made profits, and record-breaking profits at that, off of this necessary equipment, off of the vaccines, and stock market prices have soared. And meanwhile, in the US, we're looking at nurses being overworked and underpaid. We are talking about people struggling to make ends meet, and we have not been able to provide for the basic necessities of human beings, the average citizen, during the pandemic. Just the average person in the United States has not been able to be taken care of, and that is atrocious. This is the kind of income inequality, that we see in a world like this, with global capitalism at the forefront. Growth in these systems occurs most greatly during disaster, suffering, and when people are not doing well. This is exactly how global capitalism works. Capitalism as a whole relies on suffering. It will always rely on suffering. It needs suffering to make profit, and it does not value human life as a whole. This is the system that we have prioritized as the greatest economic system in the world's history, that we see as inevitable. And we need to start seeing that there are alternatives in place that can prioritize people's lives over profit. So with that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notification. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my lovely Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.